From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
It's not every day that the state takes its own capital city to court, but after a judge sided with the Rhode Island Department of Education, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley has agreed to increase school spending. Yet Smiley remains frustrated about how the state is managing its takeover of city schools and is warning residents that the legal fight could mean higher taxes. This week on Newsmakers, what's next for Providence with Mayor Brett Smiley. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi, and we welcome back to the program Providence Mayor Brett Smiley. It's good to have you. Thanks for coming in. I know it's been a busy couple of weeks for you.
It's been a very stressful couple of weeks.
Let's talk about that stress, shall we? The city and the Rhode Island Department of Education, as I said at the top of the show, struck a deal over funding for the state-controlled schools. We now know the cost to the city for fiscal year 24 and 25. It's a total of $15 million. Retro $4 million. $11 million for fiscal year 2025, and there's some out years. But I want to ask you about that $15 million figure.
Yep.
Are you satisfied with that agreement?
Yeah, I am. I think it's the best compromise we could have found. I think by many people's definition, a good compromise is when both parties are a little unhappy, and I can tell you that both parties are a little unhappy. This was a bruising process and a bruising negotiation, but we've now have certainty, and most importantly, the students, the families, the teachers in Providence can know that all of the cuts that were threatened aren't going to take place. The taxpayers of Providence should know that there will not be a mid-year tax increase, and we can now have a chance to reset the relationship with the school department and get back to focusing on how to improve outcomes for all of our students.
Before we get to cuts and taxes and what it all means to your residents, I want to explore whether there's any strain between City Hall and the State House. And I caught up with Governor Dan McKee this week in Warwick. He's been mayor before, as you know, in Cumberland. So I asked him if he were in your shoes, how would he handle it? And this is what he had to say. Take a listen.
Well, I think that's why we were talking in the spring of last year, so that we would have arrived on an agreement on a number. So as you're passing the budget, you reflect that in your budget.
So you think he waited too long?
Yes.
I don't know if you could hear my question. I said, so you think he waited too long, meaning you? Right. And he said yes. What's your reaction to that?
So last year's budget, which we passed in June, included a $5.5 million increase to school funding, the largest increase in funding from the city of Providence in 17 years. We felt like we increased funding to the amount that was tolerable without other consequences to other things that we do in the city. We have to weigh and balance a lot of other interests. I felt like that was a good number then. We found ourselves in this budget crisis now, and so this compromise, this settlement of $15 million is not going to be easy. It's not going to be without other consequences.
I get that, but he clearly disagrees with you on your setup to that answer there, that you had done the work. It sounds like he doesn't think you had.
This dispute started in 2019. This has been going on for years, and many experts and folks involved in the schools will say that the city of Providence has underfunded its schools for decades, not just since the legal dispute even. I felt like it was unsustainable or going to be too difficult to right decades worth of wrongs in one budget year. The school department obviously felt differently. It seems like the governor felt differently. And so the fact is we've now resolved it. We've resolved it in a way that will ensure that none of these critical programs for our kids get cut. And I'm excited to be able to move forward and start anew.
I want to talk a little about, and you just alluded to it, the broader financial impact on Providence of adding $15 million to your budget out of the city tax levy, right? This is not, you can't move state aid over here for this. That's the whole point, right? This is.
Well, yes. I mean, taxes are still how we pay for most things, but everything comes out of the general fund or a general revenue. So it all comes from somewhere. We are going to have a series of cost-cutting measures that will go through the rest of this fiscal year in order to to pay this $15 million. There's been some talk, it's in the weeds for probably too many people, but there were some energy credits that were unused that will be applied and counted. We're going to take every last ARPA dollar that we have now for what's called revenue recovery, which is an allowable use under the federal rules, to help with the shortfall that we're expecting, and we're going to make it work. But it will be a sacrifice, and honestly, our kids deserve a sacrifice. I'm not upset about that. I want the best for these students. It's water under the bridge at this point. The agreement is signed and we're moving forward. I still don't think a mid-year settlement like this is the right way to go about it, but it's done. And the most important thing is now that we have certainty and predictability going forward.
And yet, we have a full screen with the numbers on how the city's tax levy is broken up right now. And these numbers, every time I bring them up, people are stunned. Retiree benefits, 43% of city tax dollars. School funding, 35% before this agreement. Debt payments, 19%. Everything else, 3%. That is the fire department, the police department, parks and the snow plowing you always talk about.
That's right.
Any new initiative you want to do. And yes, there are other sources of funds, but this is the stuff you have true control of, the city tax revenue.
That's right.
I have to tell you, Mayor, when I look at that and I see the state putting the screws to get more school funding, I go back to the question of bankruptcy and whether the city's balance sheet is really in a healthy place when clearly, like, one way you're dealing with all that has been until now underfunding the schools, not just you, but prior mayors too.
Yeah, no, it is a difficult process to write and then balance the budget every year. But I know a thing or two about tough budgets, and so I've balanced and written tough budgets at the state and at the city, and we will continue to move forward. I do not believe bankruptcy is on the table or an option. That means that we have the inability to pay our bills. We're able to pay our bills. It's just going to come at the expense of other things that we might want to do, and it's going to require tough choices in the years ahead, particularly as we move forward with a new higher level of school funding into the future. I think most of the residents of Providence, I think most of the taxpayers of Providence don't mind their tax dollars going to the schools. What they would like is a higher degree of accountability, they'd like a higher degree of transparency, and they'd like better outcomes. But we all prioritize our students. The City Council prioritizes the students, I prioritize the students, and our neighbors and residents prioritize the students. And so it is a worthy place to spend the funds, but every budget year is a challenge. But we'll get through it.
But just one more thought, and I'll give it back to Tim. I mean, again, when you look at those numbers, you're adding to the school funding now. The pension contribution is going up significantly every year now because that was left so underfunded under previous mayors. You think the city can sustain these education hikes now, the continued hike in the pension and everything else, all with a 4% tax increase? Do you have to do max tax increases every year to make it work then?
Not every year. Next year, the budget that we will introduce in the spring and pass by June will require a tax increase over the levy. And I will be going to the General Assembly this spring asking for permission to exceed the 4% property tax cap. I believe we can do that one time and one time only. I don't believe it's necessary more than one time only, but it will be required next year. So I will be, in the months to come, articulating to my residents, to the City Council, and to the General Assembly why that's necessary. And I know that's asking a sacrifice of the taxpayers in Providence, but I want them to know that in addition to a larger than allowed tax increase, we will also be doing property cost savings and cost cutting in the City of Providence. It's not going to be just on the back of taxpayers.
All right, so let's explore that. You've talked about the money coming in. You are going to seek to go above that 4% next year. Sounds like, as you said earlier this week, no mid-year tax increase.
Correct.
Okay. So what do those cuts look like?
This year?
Yes.
Okay. So this year, we're probably going to need to find about $2 million in cuts as part of this $15 million settlement between ARPA, the energy credits, some other accruals that we had set aside to prepare for legal losses such as this. We're able to cover a majority of the $15 million, but there'll be about $2 million worth of cuts. The hiring freeze, which we announced last week, will stay into effect for the rest of the year, for the rest of the fiscal year, which means through June.
How many FTEs is that approximately? Not to put you on the spot. Do you know?
I mean, over the course of the year, that will end up to be probably close to 100 employees that we don't end up hiring.
It's not a small number.
It's not a small number, and it will slow down service response times on a variety of topics. It will mean that the other employees in City Hall are going to work a little bit harder because they're not going to have a full complement of staff. It's a burden and it's a sacrifice. We will remain on a non-essential spending freeze for the city, and we'll be looking for some other smaller programmatic cuts. But some of the things that were discussed, the grants to youth supporting agencies, including things like the libraries and some of our social service partners, those will be able to go out as previously scheduled. The police and fire academies, which have been included in this year's budget and planned to start in the spring, those will start according to schedule. And so we think that the cuts are tolerable. We think that while they will certainly have an impact on our ability to deliver services efficiently, will have an impact. It will not be catastrophic. And then when we write the 26 budget, we will bake in this new number, and it will necessitate, in part, a tax increase.
All right, we're overdue for a break here. Our guest this week is Providence Mayor Brett Smiley. We'll continue our conversation when we come back on Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi. Our guest this week is Providence Mayor Brett Smiley. Want to wrap up the school funding conversation. The agreement was reached. We've talked a lot about what the city has to do. Is there anything the city got out of the agreement?
One of the real concerns that we had was the lack of transparency and our concern around some of the choices that they were making. Also, we've been asked for payment, but we don't have any say in how those monies are being spent. And so the Department of Education and PPSD, Providence Public School District, did agree to a financial review. And so, which is important to me. It's important to me for two reasons. One is because we really do want to help them do better. This is about collaboration. That's what hasn't been going particularly well.
And not just throwing money at the problem.
Right, exactly. But also to give some comfort to our taxpayers who are going to be asked to contribute to this, that they have some confidence that the money is being spent in accordance with, national standards and peer districts and things like that. So there was an agreement reached where we will be able to do this financial review, and we expect to start that very soon.
Pallet shelters. Echo Village, that's a pallet shelter over on the on-ramp to 146, largely funded by federal COVID relief money, but nearly, I think, $500,000 right from your coffers. Mm-hmm. It's been met with delay after delay, originally set to open in June. The estimate we got yesterday was, quote, the winter months. Big speed bump has been fire code regulations, all that. Are you feeling buyer's remorse on this yet?
I'm frustrated. I still think it's a good solution. I've talked to mayors around the country that have these in their cities, and they have been a good solution. We know that there are people living in encampments that are unwilling, unable to go to emergency shelter beds. And these are a very good solution for folks for whom the shelter system, they've had a bad experience or they're not willing. So I think it's the right solution. I'm really upset that it's taken so long, and it has been primarily this fire code regulation. And it didn't really hit home until I went to go visit them, which was about a month ago. These are small rectangular homes. I'm 6 feet tall. Mm-hmm. When I spread my arms, I could touch the two side walls. There's a door that's an exit, and there's a window that's fire rated so you can knock it out as an emergency exit. There's a hardwired smoke detector that rings into an office that's monitored 24 hours a day with an on-site staff person. On top of that, the state required that they put sprinklers in these things.
A fire suppression system.
And then paint them with a flame retardant paint. And part of the ways in which these are supposed to be cheap and fast is that they're all prefab. You screw them together, you're ready to go. But now that doesn't work anymore. And so those regulations, I think, absolutely need to be changed. I hope the General Assembly does that this year. They decided to apply the commercial fire code.
Which we should say, all came out of the tragedy of the Station nightclub fire in 2003. These codes descended on Rhode Island because of that.
I get that, but this is the folks that are going to live here are living in encampments in my city where we have fires and overdose deaths and violence, and we cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We can make everything in Rhode Island entirely fireproof, but the cost and consequence of that is sometimes you lose sight of the bigger picture. This is emergency sheltering for people who are otherwise living in encampments, and this is it's too far. It's unreasonable, and it's going to leave people out on the street in less safe situations.
Mayor, and this story's actually dovetailed for me with a big conversation since the election, which is some analysts are saying part of the problem Democrats had is that voters in other parts of the country look at blue jurisdictions like Massachusetts and Rhode Island and say they're so clogged up with red tape, it's so expensive, they can't do anything quickly there. Why do we want more Democrats to run the whole federal government? And it's hard not to see this. I mean, seemingly, unless I'm missing something, every elected official is on board with getting these open for folks. The governor says he wants it, you want it, and yet the same government that wants it can't get out of its own way to make a decision and just open these things. I mean, it just looks dysfunctional.
It feels like the bureaucracy has ground this thing to a halt, and the state Fire Appeal Board had a discussion on these back in May, and they were the ones that decided which fire code to apply. I mean, you know, with some understanding that these are new to Rhode Island. They don't really fit neatly into the fire code, so they had to make a choice. But the choice that they made, I think, is totally unreasonable, and it does sort of reek of bureaucracy run amok and regulations gone too far. There is a decided lack of common sense sometimes in decisions that get made in government, and this, to me, seems like a classic example
You've
of that.
served as the administration director in the state, as well as the governor, chief of staff. Now you're the mayor of the capital city. I mean, how much can an elected official or a chief political advisor, like you've been in the past, actually force something to get done versus how much do you find even when you know you want to do something and you even understand the problem, you just can't because of the system we have is so tied in knots?
It depends. It's a little bit of both. And, you know, honestly, in this new role, first time ever elected to office, I'm sort of feeling my way in the ways in which sometimes I can push dilemmas like this. First of all, it is sort of a thankless task to serve on many public boards, and sometimes it's hard to find good people that are willing to do that, to get yelled at by the general public, don't get paid, you know, meetings at night, and so
reporters saying you're
So I think you have to do the hard work of like really recruiting and convincing and selling people to take some of these board jobs, which end up having a lot of power. In City Hall now, I've made a lot of changes to my boards. It is also thankless work, but it matters, and it matters in moments like this. Sometimes there's a role for public leadership to sort of give cover to those boards and say, like, I'm calling on the board to do this because it's the right thing to do, and that creates the space to allow for maybe a more controversial or provocative or unorthodox decision, and I think there's a role for public officials to do that as well. And then sometimes, no matter what you try, the bureaucracy just prevails. And so, at least in my case, in the city of Providence, I try to do my best to not let that last scenario come true. But every once in a while, all of these things are in place for a reason. It's usually because someone did one wrong thing at some point decades ago, and they made a rule change to make sure that that thing never happens again. And so you got to do that hard work of pushing past and using a little bit of common sense and trying to give cover to these organizations.
We've got to take a break. Our guest is one of the most prominent Democrats in the state, so we're going to ask him what went wrong for his party in the election. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White alongside Ted Nesi. Our guest this week, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley. Ted?
Mayor, you might have heard Democrats lost the presidential election this year, and I looked at the numbers in Providence. Trump's gone from 14% of the vote in Providence in 2016 to 23%. Obviously, it's still very Democratic, but the Democratic vote, like 1 in 10 voters left the Democratic Party, whether they went to Trump or just didn't cast a ballot this year in Providence. What do you make of that?
So, first of all, Providence saw that same shift that most other Democratic cities see. Boston's shift was about the same, so it's not unique to Providence, but it's certainly a problem for the party. And what I make of it is a couple things. One, the topic we were just having. I think there's a real frustration that government's not working for people, and there's this desire to kind of blow it all up. You know, sort of the I'll take a risk on something bold, even if I know maybe it's a little crazy. And that's one. Two, obviously, the president-elect was able to speak to people in a way that I think they understood in terms of economic hardship. And then three, I think our party, and particularly true in this corner of the world with kind of Northeast liberals, I think certain slices of Providence and certain slices of America felt sort of talked down to by elites in the Democratic Party, and we got to figure that out.
Your old friend Gina Raimondo is suddenly bubbling up this talk about her potentially running for governor again. I have to admit I'm fairly skeptical knowing her and the job she's had recently. Have you asked her about it? What do you think?
I haven't asked her about it. I've talked to her since the election. This did not come up. I think it's unlikely. She has spent the last 3.5 years negotiating with China and rolling out billions of dollars to reignite chip manufacturing in the country. Like, it just, to me, seems like she's probably going to move on to something next that's still on a national scale.
Did she give you a hint as to what she might do in that phone
conversation? She didn't. I know, I've had a chance to know the family. I know they're waiting for Tommy to graduate. I'm sure they want to take a breath. The one thing that she did mention, which I think speaks to her character, is she's very focused on, one, making sure she finishes the job at hand, and two, making sure that her staff all find new opportunities. It was the same way, honestly, as she was when she left the governor's office, was to make sure that all of her staff there, all of my former colleagues, found a spot. She was a fabulous boss and cares very much about the people that work for her, and there's a lot of people at the Commerce Department in Washington that are about to lose their job.
I want to kind of come to a close to where we started, which was the school funding fight, and you just said you talked to former Governor Raimondo. Have you talked to Governor McKee since the settlement was reached, or at least leading right up to it?
We talked leading right up to it, and honestly, it was a conversation with the governor that I think got us over the finish line. Was able to help kind of finally. I mean, tensions were high and feelings were raw, and so this was very difficult for all parties, and so that was very helpful. And now that the agreement is signed, it is. I'm optimistic that we can turn the page, take the Thanksgiving holiday to let wounds heal a little bit, and then get back to work at trying to improve outcomes for our kids. I never doubted in the midst of all of this fighting that at the end of the day, everybody wanted what was best for the kids. We sort of disagreed on how to get there. We've now resolved this very important issue, and now we can move forward in a much more healthy fashion.
Only about a minute left, Mayor. You have a large Latino population in Providence, and the new president-elect is talking about mass deportation. How concerned are you about disruption in Providence if he does go through in full with what he's discussed?
Yeah, I mean, right now I'm concerned about just general fear that has been stoked in the community, which was the same thing that happened several years ago. And so I'm trying to reassure my residents that Providence police will not be immigration officers. We want them to still feel like they can talk to their neighborhood police officers. We're very proud of the community policing that we do, and it involves conversations with undocumented folks. And if they are otherwise law-abiding residents of our city, they will not have an adverse interaction with Providence police. Beyond that, we kind of have to take it as it comes. We know that the bluster out of the Trump administration doesn't always match the actions, and so I'm trying not to jump to any conclusions until we see what actually happens.
All right, why don't we end on a happy note? We got 30 seconds left here. Thanksgiving?
Yes.
What's your favorite side dish?
My favorite side dish is sweet potatoes.
With the marshmallows?
With the marshmallows.
Oh, that's awful.
No, it's not awful.
Clearly the wrong.
That's an attack, Ed.
But as you know, I am a pie fanatic.
Yeah,
so this is a good holiday for pie connoisseurs.
What pie? You had to Desert Island. What pie would it be?
Pumpkin.
I agree with that. I mean, we disagree on the topping of the sweet potato.
I mean, maybe not year-round, but at Thanksgiving, pumpkin.
I'm with you. All right, Providence Mayor Brett Smiley, thanks so much. Thank you for watching. If you missed any of it, it's on WPRI.com. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.